Sorry, technical difficulties, no hot mics yet. But if you're in appropriations this morning, there may have been, and I will deny that. No. Okay, today's Water Day, and I know that there's some of the committee that could probably give this presentation. So if our presenters get hoarse, we'll have you guys that can fill in. So bill introductions. I have a bill RS 0708 concerning a water task force. Any questions? Any objections? Seeing none, the bill is requested. Any other bill introduction, bill requests? A reminder, Monday is the last day to request a bill that you yourself want to have your name on. And then a week from the next Monday is the deadline for committee bills, correct? Yes. All right. Nothing else? All right. This is something that's happened every year for several years, and I think it's important. And water is so key. It's so key that the House made it their own committee a few years ago and then brought it back and then created that a couple of years ago as well. So with that, every year the Kansas Water Authority presents to several committees, and today is our turn. So with that, we will have the Kansas Water Authority annual report. Don Buehler, who is the chair of the Water Authority, is here. So Ms. Buehler, thanks once again. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee. It's my pleasure to be here today. Few of you have already heard from me this week, but for those of you that haven't, it's a pleasure to see you and to share with you information from the Kansas Water Authority. I'm going to go through this document, and I know you have several in front of you, but if you could find the one called Annual Report. I'm here today representing 13 voting members of the Kansas Water Authority and over 140 Regional Advisory Committee members across the state. I want to present to you the annual report and to show you how we use the money that you gave us to solve problems in your community and to help Kansans. And our goal is to provide a transparent and accountable reporting so that you can do your job to safeguard taxpayer dollars. So I'm going to walk you through this report briefly because I know you have a full agenda today. On page 1, we have the table of contents. Pages 2 and 3, there's a letter from the chair on the left. On the right side, briefly, I want to share with you information about the Kansas Water Authority. As I said, there are 13 voting members who are appointed by the governor or legislative leadership. And then there are 11 ex officios, and the ex officios are the head of our agencies that we work with on water. They are our experts in the room. All of us that are appointed, we are volunteers that volunteer on this water authority. Most of us have day jobs or are retired. And if you look at the makeup of the Kansas Water Authority members with the state of Kansas map, you'll see that we're spread across the state and we represent different interests across the state. So for example, you can see that my name is Don Buehler, I'm from Eudora, and I was the governor's appointee as the chair of the Water Authority. On the opposite side of the state in Colby, Kansas, is Lynn Goosen, and he represents Groundwater Management Districts 1, 3, and 4. So you can see the makeup of the Water Authority on this map, and then a list of everyone below, as well as the ex officio members. The Water Authority is within and a part of the Kansas Water Office, and so we advise the governor, the legislature, and the director of the Kansas Water Office on water policy issues. We also approve the Kansas Water Plan. We make recommendations for funding and spending on the State Water Plan Fund. We approve federal contracts, administration, and regulations that are proposed by the Kansas Water Office. We have 3 committees. We have a budget committee, a public water supply committee, and a regional advisory committee operations. I'm going to go through to page 4 is a list of acronyms. I would say water is probably one of the most acronym-rich areas that I have worked in, and so there is an acronym list there for your use. On page 7, these are the investment highlights for 2024. This is a new format this year, so after we're done here today, if you have any feedback, please provide that to the Kansas Water Office. We would love to hear any feedback from you, whether it's the kind of information you're looking for or if you need something different. But this is an overview of the investment highlights. And then if we move on to pages 8 and 9, you'll see more detailed information about the highlights of the budget accomplishments. So for example, we have, according to the state water plan, we have 5 areas called guiding principles. And these 5 areas are the 5 that you see at the top: conserve and extend the High Plains Aquifer, secure, protect, and restore our Kansas reservoirs, improve the state's water quality, reduce our vulnerability to extreme events, which is resiliency, and then increase awareness of Kansas water resources, which is education. So these projects are listed within those 5 categories. So for example, you can see that in 2024, we had $500,000 for water conserving technology in a stock water pilot project. If you look on the other side of the page, you can see the dollars that were spent on contamination remediation. So hopefully this will provide you with some great information. But additionally, the director of the Kansas Water Office will be back, I think, in front of this committee with a budget overview. That's a question. Ag budget, thank you. So there'll be opportunities to dive deeper into the information. On pages 10 and 11, I want to take a moment to talk about House Bill 2302. Find my notes. All right. So I'd like to take a moment here and extend a very grateful and heartfelt thank you for supporting House Bill 2302, which provides upfront technical assistance and on-the-ground actions needed to address various water quantity and quality needs. These new resources have enabled the state to make significant progress on critical water needs across Kansas, including rehabilitating high-risk dams, improving the efficiency of irrigation systems in water-stressed areas, and cleaning legacy contamination sites near small towns. I think what was most surprising to many of us was that in FY24, the first year for the program, we saw 309 applications totaling $380 million in requests, of which we had $18 million available to award. $18 million is a lot of money. But I also want to stress that we had $380 million in requests, and what that shows is the need across the state. In FY25, we saw 286 applications totaling $227 million in requests for $27 million available to award. So thank you very much for those programs that have helped Kansans across the state. I'm going to move on to page 12 and 13. This is an overview of our State Water Plan Fund recommendations. And then on to 14 and 15. These are the recommendations from the Water Authority for state policy. So each year, one of our charges is to advise the governor, the legislature, and the director of water office on water policy issues and make recommendations. So we put these recommendations into our annual report. The first one is that we are asking for support for the Kansas Water Plan Implementation Framework, which is what Julie Lorenz is here today to share with you. We're also asking for project management support for a 2-year ramp up to the 10-year program, which again, Julie will go through in more detail. And then we're asking for support for the State Water Plan Fund budget, which is where we are starting to move towards a budget that focuses on outcomes and problem solving rather than 50 line items, which is what you typically see in the state water plan. So for example, we'll have water quality, and these are the 5 areas of the guiding principles of the state water plan fund. We want to focus on those 5 areas and how to solve those problems. Additionally, you'll see that we had an additional funding recommendation of $20 million. We put that in here because we were trying to show that we still have a great need for water issues across the state. The governor's budget shows $30 million, and her budget was built upon the recommendations from the Water Authority. And then the last page of the report is page 16, and this gives you an overview of the strategic implementation planning that we undertook in this last year. The Water Authority, the Regional Advisory Committee, and Kansans from all across the state participated in meetings to talk about how we come up with a long-term plan, which Julie Lorenz will go through in detail for you today. And with that, sir, that's the end of my report, if you have any questions.
Don, thank you. Questions? The Water Authority? None? Everybody likes to drink. See, I brought my water. See, I was ready, prepared. All right, stand by. So I think we'll hold off if we have questions based on Julie's presentation too. But thank you again for being in front of the committee. And we have lots of information to digest. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Now we're going to talk about more of the implementation part of a framework moving forward with water. And Secretary Julie Lorenz, former Secretary of Transportation, you and I spent a lot of time together this summer, going all over the state to these water meetings. So you're a principal consultant there with, it says 1898 companies, is that right? Okay, all right. Welcome to committee. Have you ever been to the Ag Committee before? Yes. You've been in this room, but.
Oh, yeah, this room's familiar.
Yes.
I
Well,
pretty much remember who sits where.
Yes.
From previous days.
Welcome to the Agriculture Committee, yes.
Thank you all. Thanks for allowing me to be here today. Some of you have already seen this presentation. There is no quiz associated with it, but I know that some folks are going to be listening to see if I've got same thing to say. I do. Actually, I've got a couple of new slides for you. A little bit of context to get started. To help kind of frame up the conversation first, and Don did a great job talking about the Water Authority, but in terms of how in terms of how the state is organized, we have about 14 agencies that have different roles and responsibilities when it comes to delivering water. 3 primary agencies, first being the Water Office, headed by the Executive Director, Connie Owen, and they really focus on mostly planning, policy, and reservoir sorts of issues. Then we get to KDHE. They're on the regulatory side of things and really charged with looking at the safety of our drinking water supply. And then the third agency is the Department of Agriculture, in which we have the Water Resources and the State Water Engineer. Earl's with us today, along with Lane. And that's also where the conservation work is done as well. There's considerable, and I think this is worth noting, there's considerable collaboration between the agencies, but there's also some overlap that exists there. So that's something for y'all to bear in mind when you think about how we're organized and how we deliver water in the state of Kansas. Now, Don talked a bit about these are the guiding principles associated with the water plan that was adopted in 2022. But if you look back in time just a bit, you'll see that really under Governor Brownback, some really good work was done in terms of thinking about policy and recommendations, but now it's time to build upon that work through the 2022 water plan and figure out how we actually implement the work. How do we do the work? And that's what this implementation framework is about, is how do you move from good ideas, and certainly some of that's been done through 2302, but how do we institutionalize it in a way that it becomes a rolling program like we've seen great success in transportation, which is where I have my roots. We're into our 4th 10-year program called the IKE program, and we've learned a lot of lessons that we can bring forward into the delivery of water. This is a slide I like to show, and because I'm now going to talk about our 3 big problems, and this is around the aquifers. And I start by saying that this map is not fair. It's not fair at all, because when you look at the aquifer, it recharges at different rates. Not everybody has the same access to water, and quite frankly, it's a two-way street here. Humans impact water consumption, and we can have an impact on what actions happen to the aquifer, but likewise, Mother Nature is part of this, as part of the equation. And we may have more droughts, we may have more rain some years, so we have to have a more adaptive, flexible process in terms of addressing our water issues. And this is a great example when you look at our aquifer isn't equally distributed. It's also really important to note the economic impacts of water. So the towns, the communities, the counties that sit atop these aquifers account for $57 billion per year in GDP. So it really matters, and it doesn't just matter to ag, because when you start to look at the ripple effect, ag helps drive the communities, their vitality and their prosperity, and you start to think about car dealers and all the other, and restaurants and all the other things that make up a community. And if you don't have water, you're not going to have communities, and you're not going to have economic impact, economic viability. So it's really important to talk about these. And when you see those red spots, that's where we have 25 years or less left in water supply. So those are important things to bear in mind. We have some real problems out west. That's not the only place that we have problems, though, when we get to our reservoirs. So when you build a reservoir, you know it's going to fill up with silt over time. We can take some preventive actions to keep some of that dirt from getting into our reservoirs. And I'm not a water expert, so I use really, like simple language here. But you want to try to keep the runoff from getting into the reservoirs. We need to take care of our reservoirs because they provide 2 functions. They help collect, if we're in a flood situation, they help protect us from floods. They also store water for future drinking water. We know that about 2/3 of all Kansans rely on reservoirs for their drinking water supply. So reservoirs are important, and you know that you're going to get 50 to 75, maybe 100 years out of your reservoir. Our oldest one is Canopolis at age 76, and our youngest, so to speak, is Hillsdale at 42. So we've got a reservoir problem that needs to be addressed, and they are quite expensive to take care of. And then on the water quality side, we know that this is where an ounce of prevention is worth more than a pound of cure. And if we can have higher water quality, we're going to spend less money in remediating the water so that it'll be ready for drinking. And you can see those numbers there. This map is one that I like to say is nothing to be exactly proud of. Every place you see a green line, those are streams that do not meet the standard for the purpose for which they're designated. So maybe you've got a stream out there that should be, you should be able to swim in, but you can't, but maybe you can fish in it. So we've got some cleanup to do there. When you sum up all of what I've just shown you, I would say every Kansan has a water problem of some sort. If you're on the east side of the state, you got a reservoir problem. If you're on the west side of the state, you don't have enough water. The solution to our problems vary depending on where you live, and so does the price point. And so that's why it's important to think about a water program in a statewide perspective, not one size, not one solution fits all of them, but we all have a stake in having a healthy water supply and healthy economic vitality. What I'm going to talk a bit about today in terms of our framework is that it is both bold and it's practical. And those don't always sort of fit in your head at the same time. It's bold because I'm going to talk about the vision of every Kansan having access to a 50-year water supply when it doesn't even necessarily exist right now in our state. But the way you get there is in a very practical way. So it's bold to say, hey, I'm going to climb Mount Everest, but I can't just take off today and do that. I would die because your body has to acclimate as you climb to the summit. So you climb a bit, you have to take a breath, then you can climb some more and some more. And that is sort of a good analogy for what we're suggesting here in this implementation framework, is a 2-year ramp-up period that gets us to a 10-year program. The full report is available online, and you have the summary there, but if you look back in the appendices, you'll see we talked to Kansans about potential funding sources, Their thoughts on criteria, which I'm not going to get to today. I'd love to come back sometime and talk to you about criteria. It's really important for how projects would be selected. But there's lots of good information in the appendices for those of you who want to dive into the details. In terms of key takeaways, there's, whoops, all right, I missed that one. All right, we talked to more than 1,500 Kansans all across the state. We had more than 50 meetings with key stakeholder groups like Farm Bureau, conservation kinds of organizations, the whole gamut. We talked to lots of different folks. What we are bringing to you today are 43 clearly defined outcomes. We know it's important for you all to be able to go back to your constituents and say, here are your dollars that we are investing, and here are the results you should expect. And then you all as a body should call the agencies in and make sure to track with those outcomes to make sure there's full accountability. And if there are places that aren't producing the results that had been anticipated, you shift those dollars, you tweak the programs so that you're getting the maximum you can out of that investment. And we have 8 specific recommendations. We could have had 100 recommendations. We narrowed it down to the elite 8, so to speak, a basketball reference, of the things that we think are the most important. Okay, in terms of the 3 key takeaways, now is the time to act. There is urgency. We have more than 100 communities that don't have 50 years worth of water supply. They're running out of water. We know more than 70,000 Kansans rely on water systems that have at least one health infraction. Kansans are supportive of an annual investment of $140 million, in some cases more than $140 million, in a 10-year program modeled after transportation. However, and this is important, this is that ramp-up period, they said, give the agencies time to strengthen, to add capacity, to build out the policies, to evaluate current investments, and come back in 2 years for a fully funded program. When we talk about the value of this program, it's to help with large-scale infrastructure investments, to make sure that it's responsive as conditions change and that we are keeping an eye on our economic impact. It works this way. We've got these 2-year outcomes. We've got this 10-year overarching program with the 8 recommendations. All right, if there's one slide that I think is really key to sort of like bringing the whole thing together, it's this slide. So, working from top to bottom, you see then this green piece is the legislative role. In the blue, that's where you've got agency responsibilities, and yellow are stakeholders. This first 2 years, there's a key role here in terms of the legislature to provide some enhanced funding to kick off this ramp-up period. The agencies can begin some of this work right now, but additional funds will help us accelerate through the ramp-up period, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. The agencies, likewise, need to get started on the implementation work that's available, and there needs to be some give and take with them reporting out in terms of accountability and establishing, as you see down in that next row, performance metrics so you can know which programs are most successful, where you might want to invest more, and where you might want to make some changes to programs. We'll continue that evaluation for the remaining 10 years. These local consult meetings, this is where you take the outcomes and you talk with constituents all across the state and say, here's what we're learning. Every constituent, every stakeholder is getting something out of these investments. If we want to change the way some of these investments work, you need to talk to people before you make the changes, A, so they understand it, and B, so that you can get their input on how those investments could work better. Now, you'll see this legislature establishes a revenue program, and that comes largely through the work of a task force. You got to do this task force work, and I acknowledge that the bill was, you heard earlier some bill introduction there. So here's what we learned from transportation, is that if you look back, in 2018, there was a legislative task force. It was chaired by Representative Prael and Senator McGinn, and we went all around the state. And we heard what's working in transportation and what's not working in transportation. That was in 2018. Then in 2019, KDOT went all around the state and said, based on what we just heard last year, what would you want to see in a 10-year program? So that by the time we got to 2020, on Thursday afternoon, it was around March 18th, at 2 p.m., the IKE 10-year transportation program was passed. It was an abbreviated session because of COVID, and it passed with 94% support on both sides of the aisle, because we had done so much work with stakeholders, with legislators, to make sure that the bill was going to work for all of Kansas. We had criteria identified, lots of process identified, metrics identified, and it was through that process, doing the work, ramping up to that program, that we were so successful in getting it passed. We can learn from that process and bring some of those lessons into this process. It's also important to know we are standing on 40 years of good transportation programs. I would just suggest to you all, you've got the opportunity right now to reframe the way Kansas delivers water. You are sort of like at the CHP time of transportation. It's really, I think, remarkable if you step back and think about how those 40 years have impacted our state and how 40 years of a different approach to water could impact our state. Okay, we've talked about being bold and practical and, in this case, a fiscally responsible incremental approach to funding water. This is just another view of how there's this interaction, how you make changes across 10 years' time in response to what you learn, in response to actual physical conditions, and in response to feedback. I would also point out, this is important to note as a legislator, there are going to be good years and bad years. It's just part of the business cycle. You need to have a way to scale up and down your investments across a 10-year period. And that was one of the lessons from transportation, that you want to be able to communicate with your stakeholders as conditions change in a fiscal way too. Okay, so in terms of this slide, what we've added, if you see kind of that yellow box at the bottom, what we've done now is we have expanded this implementation framework. So the framework talks about what could be accomplished in the ramp up in a 10-year program if it was pegged to 140 million. We have added information related to if there were an additional 30 million made available, as the governor has suggested. The reason we didn't put the 30 million in is A, we didn't know that when we developed the report, but also the report or the implementation framework is intended to be evergreen, and it wouldn't be appropriate to have just one fiscal year's view in something that's supposed to last 10 years. So this is new information in the gold bar here, and I'm going to keep an eye on time because I know y'all will have lots of good questions. When we went out and talked about 140 million, it was after we had done one round of local consult and had given 3 different scenarios with outcomes at the 60, 120, and 360 mark. We heard what Kansans most wanted out of a future water program, and then that's how we got to the $140 million with outcomes. Okay, this is another way of thinking about problem solving instead of, as Don talked about, these 50 line items. And again, this is taking some thinking from KDOT. So this is about being agency agnostic. It's not saying how much are we going to spend on individual line items, but instead, how much are we going to spend to solve some of our biggest problems? So in transportation, we invest in preservation, modernization, and expansion. We have criteria for those 3 categories. And then we do line items so legislators can understand how much we're spending. Same approach can work here in water. Not just by agency, but rather how much are Kansans spending to fix big problems. So it's a way to rethink about how we invest and measure our investments. Doesn't mean you don't have visibility and decision-making around those individual line items, but it is important to step away and be agency agnostic and think about problem solving instead of individual line items. And I'm happy to talk more about that. Okay, I'm going to walk you through these slides pretty quickly. So this is what I'm talking about when I said we've got the base budget at 60 million. So we've got contaminated orphan well sites. We have more than 140 hazardous waste sites across the state. With the base budget, we could address 4 sites by 2027. If you were to have the ramp-up enhancement, we could get to 6 sites. By the end of our 10-year period, we could get to 50-plus sites. So page by page, and the booklet now that you sort of have in front of you outlines all the outcomes that can be achieved at the base, at the enhanced, and at the full 10-year view. On this slide, you'll see, for example, across the top, 60, 90, and 140, not being invested in groundwater support, but rather what you can accomplish is listed below. So 10 counties under the base, we could get to 25 counties at $500,000 increase. And over the course of 10 years, you could get to more than 50, address sites in more than 50 counties, recognizing there's more than one site in each of those counties. Likewise, in this case, for example, this is a good example of how a state investment can help you leverage federal dollars. You can see we could secure a $25 million federal grant in this particular line item investment. Okay, reservoirs, same thing. We outline what could be accomplished under the base, under the ramp up. The intention here is that by the end of a 10-year period, we will have addressed all the reservoirs in the far right column, which is a water supply for more than 1.7 million Kansans. On the resiliency side, what you can see here, and Don talked a bit about it, is on the grant side of things. I think that what's important about this slide to see is on the far right where it says TBD. We need to see how effective our grants are, what the appetite is and the need for across the state for grants. So we haven't pegged a 10-year number for that. We want to be more adaptive as that comes along. We also know that it is incredibly important to offer technical assistance to our small communities. It doesn't matter if we push money out and they can't use it wisely, then we will have done no favors to our state. You can see here in terms of dam construction, and these range from smaller dams to bigger dams. We have more than 500 that need to be addressed. We can get to a little less than half of those in a 10-year period with this investment over 10 years. This one, and I know, like I keep saying, like, this is a really good slide. This one's another good slide. We went around the state. Nobody said these words. Nobody said, we want research and education outcomes through an independent program accountability and evaluation. Nobody said all those words. What people said, what Kansans said are, we want to know, how are you using our money, and is it accomplishing, is it moving the needle on our biggest problems? The only way you know that is if you set a target and you measure your accomplishments, or what percentage are we making in terms of improvements, and then report that back. In this case, in the base budget, we've allocated $900,000 for independent evaluation. The governor suggests adding $500,000 more. And by the end of the program, we would be spending on an annual basis $2 million, not just to grade our efforts, but to figure out how to improve our efforts so that we make sure we're returning good value to taxpayers. This is a quick overview, a summary of the $90 million total investment, 60 base, 30 in enhancements. Our framework here are the recommendations. As I've said, it's this elite 8, so to speak, and they all work together. That's, as we built this out, there's some evaluation, there's some regional planning, you'll see what it means, but I want to spend a little time on this 50-year promise. This is the linchpin of the whole thing. It is to say that the vision here is that every Kansan will have access to 50 years of water supply. That's the vision. The planning part of it is that within the next 10 years, in this 10-year program, by the end of that time, communities would know if they have 50 years or not of supply, or they would have a plan for how to get it. Okay, so we can't promise everybody's going to have 50 years of water by the end of 10 years, but you can help communities figure that out. A good example would be Leota out west. They're running out of water. They have found wells 6 miles north of town. They're going to have to pump and pipe water 6 miles into their town. You go a little further to Sublet. They've sunk over 3,000 wells, and Earl and Lane will correct me if I'm... How many? 3 test wells. 3 test wells, and they can't find one that produces enough water for their community. And they don't quite have a plan yet. So I'm not talking about, oh, there might be a problem. We need to help communities figure out how they can have access to this 50 years of water. So I'm not like this is a real world problem, and we've got to figure out how to work together, and I'm going to get to that in just a minute, to help provide some assurance. Independence, Southeast Kansas, great example. They're relying on the Elk River Reservoir. It's filling up with silt faster than anticipated, and they only have one, and that's their sole source. So we've got communities that are running out of a resource or don't have access to it. So 50 years, the plan is I will gift to my children, my future grandchildren, 50 years of water supply. 10 years, and that would get us to 2075. By 2035, it's 10 years from now, have another water program, and we figure out how we get ourselves to 2085. It becomes this rolling program where you figure out what have we got and what do we need to do to have another 50 years. This idea of forever water sounds good. I don't know how to deliver forever water, but if you break it down to 50 years at a time, it gives us something to work towards. Okay. This is a lot of what I was talking about, creating these basin plans, these watershed plans. How does this groundwater, surface water work together? And this is really important. How do we create a project pipeline, not a water pipeline, a project pipeline, so that every region knows what are their most important projects, and as money becomes available, how will that be applied in their region? Very much a transportation example. This one is Caney and Coffeyville. Caney almost ran out of water. They're now going to buy 250,000 gallons of water from Coffeyville every day. Gives Coffeyville a really good customer, and now Caney has a water supply. We would say that one of our recommendations is that every community before receiving state money would look at the possibility of regionalization. They have to just look at the idea of it so that they can have a plan. It is not physically possible in every part of the state, so they would be exempted, but we really need communities to be getting their plans together. There's a great quote in the back of this report that says, "A community without a plan isn't a good investment." Because you, as stewards of taxpayer dollars, have to be thinking about those investments. Okay, we've talked a bit about streamlining our water programs so that they're easier to access, easier to understand. One-door policy is what we're talking about there. This is one of my favorite ones. We're kind of getting close on time. I'd love to come back and talk to you about this, but remember how I was talking about some communities don't have that much water? That's what this dashboard shows you. So that communities are informed, and that helps them have better conversations with their producers and with their citizens. And so making that information available and easy to understand is really important. Problem solving, I think you've seen this now over and over again. This isn't just like invest and see what happens. There are specific outcomes that are measurable and can be tracked over time. This one we can talk about more. I'm happy to take a question, but as stewards of taxpayer dollars, to incentivize people to use technology and conserve is a great thing. What sometimes happens is, so if I was going to do cost share and I implement technology, maybe I conserve that water, or maybe I just use the same amount of water and grow more crops. So like there's a give and take there, and I think we have to think about from a public policy perspective. Are we incentivizing using the same amount of water and growing more, or are we trying to incentivize reduction in water use with no impact to profitability? So our recommendation is that you award bonus points for the cost share if you're in a LEMA or WCA, or where we know that we can track that you're using less water, because that is the public policy goal. And then lastly, and not least important, is better collaboration and partnership with our federal partners. And a shout out, I think, to Senator Fagg, who really did some great work with our delegation. And now we're going to pay simple interest instead of compound interest on some debt, saving about $40 million. This is a slide that shows that we know we need, that this isn't magic. This is work that people have to do. In some cases, state agencies and state employees. When we get to sort of this independent evaluation, you'd probably want to outsource that to a more independent group. But we know we need to hire people, and we need more engineers. They're really hard to find. We don't want to delay in implementation. So, you know, we need to set our goals on adding resources, but that may or may not be possible in the short term. I've talked a bit about this, but this is like, for example, on the ag irrigation, we would set a bonus point approach that we talked about. We would evaluate the effectiveness during the ramp-up period. We want to try to get to at least 400 systems. We would then, in 2 years' time, measure to see, did we hit 400 systems? Did we see reduced usage? We would go out and talk to the public through local consult and our RAC meetings, report results. If we think we need to tweak that program, talk with our stakeholders and make changes as necessary to improve performance, such that By the end of the decade, we will have reduced water usage by 15%. We will have gotten upgrades to 10,000 systems, done audits on 15,000 systems without impact to profitability. So that is a big goal. But you get there by doing it 2 years at a time. Again, bold, but practical and incremental. This is a quick slide that shows you how the framework gets to some of our biggest and toughest problems. Momentum. Thank you. Great work has been done and has been funded in the last couple of years. We're on the right trajectory. We need to keep the momentum going. There's no better demonstration than last Friday afternoon. I was on a webinar where we walked all of our stakeholders through this framework. It was 4:30 on Friday afternoon. We still had 200 people on the webinar. So there is great interest and great momentum around this process. This is an important series of slides where it shows what the money's important, so is the thinking. Because sometimes you just carry over balances. In this case, the governor said, no, don't carry over this balance. Invest in projects that are ready to go. So you see about $3.3 million here in funds that sort of may have been carried over. Instead, they will be deployed into projects that are ready to go. The first one I want to call your attention to is at the top. It's the Equus beds, $1 million near Wichita to start clearing up that chloride plume. That underscores the importance of getting to our biggest problem sooner, but it also underscores why it's important to have a pipeline of projects that are ready to go. KDOT is a great example. If we get better bid prices or we don't get environmental clearance on another project, we have in the pipeline projects that are ready to go so that we are consistently investing dollars to make improvements on our system. That is the same approach here. You can see also additional funds for stock water, efficiency program for contamination remediation, more independent evaluation, we've already talked about that, and kickstarting this long-term water supply planning. And this one is my personal favorite slide. Because of Joe on the far right. So here's the thing. We had at the water conference in the fall, the panel was made up of these student leaders, and they are smart, and they are energetic, and I was left with a lot of hope, and particularly Joe on the far right. So he is at Fort Hays State. He's an ROTC. He wants to go back to his farm. He will be the 4th or 5th generation. And here's the story that Joe tells that I think is our challenge and our hope. He's like, I want to do the right thing. I want to conserve water. I want to be able to hand down my farm someday to the kids that I don't have and to the grandkids I don't have, but I hope that I have. And if they want a farm, I want them to have that opportunity. So I want to do the right thing. And at the same time, like I have to make a living. I can't change everything and not make a living. And so I feel like there are a whole lot of people all around the state that are counting on all of us to get this right so that they have the same opportunities that we have all had, that we've all been lucky enough to have. And you've got a great opportunity to start making some real differences in how we deliver water and preserve water. And so with that, I'm happy to take any questions and always come back for more information if you want it.
Very good. Representative Mosley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Lorenz. My first question is, going back to the slide that you mentioned, the 25 years worth of water, is that best case scenario if climate stays steady, or is that also modeling for?
So I should have said, and I thank you for asking. So here, and certainly Earl or Lane will correct me, but I should have added some caveats to that analysis. So that is based on current pumping rates with the current well, with sort of like average conditions, right? Like not particularly more drought or not particularly more rain. So it's sort of what, if you were at status quo, you would project.
All right, awesome. And can I ask one more question, Mr. Chairman? And my next question is, which I'm actually drawing a blank on it. Oh, is this the best case scenario where all the stakeholders are also, because I don't know there's like the difference between like long-term farmers and like new farmers because they have like more water rights. Are all the stakeholders necessary for this plan to be implemented and have the best case scenario that you presented today?
I think I should ask our state water engineer. Is what so that it's you get good information.
Earl, would you state your name for the record, please?
You bet, Mr. Chairman. Earl Lewis, I'm the Chief Engineer Director at the Kansas Department of Agriculture's Division of Water Resources. So I would say best case scenario is we need to get everybody involved. This is, we're all using water. We're all part of this community. I think part of our problem, frankly, has been we have divided that up and focused on one part versus another part rather than trying to engage everybody and bring everybody along at the same time.
And then my final question is, are you seeing pushback on implementing a plan like this when it comes to a commercial farmer versus like a more like family owned where they're part of the community and they've been there for generations? Are you seeing those stakeholders that who may not have connections to Kansas besides making money in Kansas? Are you seeing them also buying into something like this?
I don't think we can kind of split that out demographically that way. We've kind of got the whole gamut, and we've got folks that you might say are more commercial. If we think about some of our large livestock feeding operations that maybe have facilities in multi-states, they may be some of our most aggressive folks in trying to lead the way. I think it's individual. We've got 10,000 different folks that are getting a water use report and working on it right now, so it kind of runs the gamut.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Representative Schlangen-Siepen.
Okay, this is I have a two-part question. When I was growing up, I think in junior high school, people were already talking about the aquifer and the end of it, and here we are, almost 50 years later, still talking about the aquifer. And I used to think of it as a huge underground cistern out in western Kansas until I read Lucas Basir's book, Running Out in Search of Water on the High Plains. A National Book Award finalist, great book, and he makes very clear that when we talk about the aquifer, it is a very complex Swiss cheese of geostratigraphy that is just not one and the same thing. And so you used the word recharge earlier, and I was just curious. Some of those areas have collapsed and will probably never recharge. What is the capability of recharge in this area, and what's required in order? How long would it take to recharge some of these areas? I mean, what are the?
I think
I know there's no one answer to this question, but I'm just curious about it. That's all.
I think that's you said it. It's not consistent. That's why I show the map of saying it's not fair. I mean, I think sometimes we get really caught up in what's fair, and when you're dealing with a physical formation, it's at different rates, and some of it may never recharge. And so being mindful now, I mean, I think we think of it sometimes like a bank, and we've made a lot of withdrawals, and deposits go in very slowly, if at all. So we got to really protect that bank that remains.
So my second question is, given the drought out west, and I'm sure rainfall plays some role in that, I'm guessing. I was thinking about what Dale Strickler talked to us about, Mr. Chairman, a couple of sessions ago, or last session, I guess. And he was talking about how one of the things, and I don't know, I'm not a biologist, so I can't speak to this. Some of you may know more about that. I'm sure you know more about this than I do. But he was talking about how, sort of the destruction of the prairies, has led to a reduction in fungal spores in the atmosphere, and that those fungal spores are often key to water droplet formation, and that may be a contributor to the drought scenario. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but it does raise the question. To what extent does how we use land, how we farm land, what crops we use? We've heard about sorghum and the advances that have made in sorghum and in other kinds of crops, cotton and hopefully sesame seeds. My question is, how is agricultural use and viability being integrated into this water plan?
Yeah. So when we talk about things like education, like technology, technical assistance, all of those things, along with conservation, they all come into play. It's a very interconnected both implementation framework to reflect the interconnectedness across our state.
And if I can finish looking over at the youthful representative at the end of the table you showed in the slide, I just want to say, I find this presentation thrilling, and I've sat on other committees, and I wish this approach to long-term solutions, for example, in how youth recidivate, or any other question, that such an approach could be taken and such a long-range kind of vision could be developed, because I think it's really exciting to see this, and because you've already demonstrated your skills in one area and are now bringing them to another. I think this is particularly exciting, and I embrace the idea that this is the beginning of something really exciting for the state here.
Yes, thank you. I really underscore, this can be the beginning, and we can learn from another. It won't be perfect. Sure. We got lots to learn, but we have a basis upon which to build.
All right, Vice President, Vice President, wow, Vice Chair Neely. Yes.
Thank you for your presentation. I appreciate it. Real quick question. You don't have to go into it too much, but you had said that you had projects that were prepared to get started on. We can't guarantee that this would happen, but let's say the federal would throw some money this direction. Do we have projects that are ready to go so that we don't have to wait for the next 2-year cycle to come up?
We have some projects that are ready to go. I would also underscore, well, that's why it's important to do the feasibility work, some of the preliminary engineering, so that you have that base of projects ready to go always on the shelf, so to speak. Yep.
Very good. Representative Fairchild?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When you compare the funding for water programs in Kansas to states that are the similar size, how much are we spending in comparison to other states that are close to the same size as us?
We'll need to get that information. I want to make sure we get you a good answer, so we need to come back with that.
Good question. Thank you.
It is. Thank you.
Representative Roth?
I'm not sure if this is the right question, but is there any, you talked about recharging the aquifers, or maybe recharging wells. Is there any plan for the utilization of wastewater that's been, through the cleaning process?
Yeah, I'm going to ask Earl to come up and speak to that, please.
Thank you.
Because we're doing some really interesting work in that area.
Yep, you bet. So there are a number of projects primarily driven by the individual cities. I'd say the first stage that a city goes through is they start using some of their treated wastewater for parks and ball fields and some of those things. That kind of takes care of part of their demand. We are involved in projects in both Garden City and Dodge City where we're taking treated wastewater and then using it to recharge some of their well fields. So we're starting to see some of that, and I expect that that'll grow over time as well. But it's really driven by the local city and their situation.
Thank you very much for that answer. Thank you, Chairman.
All right, Representative Gardner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for your presentation. I just wanted a little clarification here on page 28 of your presentation. There's a 26 budget summary. Reservoirs is 8.5 million. And on Dawn's presentation on page 15, there's a $5 million ask for John Redmond Reservoir hydrosuction, 3 million, and 2 for sedimentation planning. Are those separate asks, or are they?
So I think that's a distinction between, and I'm going to ask Vijay to come up and help with that. I think that's probably the distinction between the Water Authority's recommendation and the governor's, that she built upon that. So I'm going to ask Vijay to come up and speak directly to that.
Vijay,
If that's okay.
that's fine. Just state your name for the record, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Vijay Ramasamy. I'm the Governor's Special Advisor for Water. Appreciate that question, Representative. That is a difference between the specific Water Authority recommendation and what's in the Governor's budget, but it builds on it, right? And so The $3 million that you see listed there to do the hydrosuction pilot in the John Redmond Reservoir, which, supplies water for over 100,000 Kansans, also the Wolf Creek Generating Station, that is in the governor's budget enhancements as a project similar to Tuttle Creek to try this technology there. And then in terms of the reservoir sedimentation planning, that additional $2 million enhancement is not in the governor's budget, but, routine kind of work with the Army Corps and assessment of our reservoirs still continues. The other piece that's in the governor's budget, which is from the Water Authority recommendations, is additional money for upstream work. So helping to put in buffer strips, for example, to reduce the rate of sediment that actually goes into our reservoir. So we can manage it when it already is in the reservoir, but also reduce the rate of sedimentation so we can help do the prevention piece, but also address the reservoir itself.
Can I ask one more question? The John Redmond project's been going on for about 5 years now, and there's sediment basins behind there, and they pumped them full of sediment. And could you give me any idea about what we've invested in that to this point and what the results have been?
Sure. I think, sorry, Mr. Chair, if that's okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm going to start with maybe the distinction between what the governor's enhancement piece is and maybe previous pieces, but I know Director Owen and Earl can probably speak to this piece, but there has been conventional dredging projects done in John Redmond Reservoir, right? So we've, gone in and just dug the sediment out. We've seen that that's not a cost-effective investment for the state. It's really expensive. We don't necessarily know what to do with the sediment once we get it out. These new types of technologies, like you've seen us try to invest in Tuttle Creek, are new types of technologies that try to sort of, keep the sediment moving downstream and try different technologies that may be more cost effective, kind of like a big pump to kind of move it downstream is what we're trying in Tuttle Creek. And so it's not doing the same things that we've done before. It's taking technology that's maybe worked in other areas like hydrosuction and trying it in our reservoirs moving forward. But I think what we've seen is that the state of Kansas, with the work that Director Owen has done, is really kind of leading the way on trying these new technologies across the country. This is a big problem. It's going to continue to be a big problem, and we're going to have to try new things to try to address the life cycle of these reservoirs. And we know that conventional dredging, like we did in John Redmond before, is just not cost effective.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, Representative Blex.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentations. A little bit on recharge. It's huge amount. It's dependent upon snowfall. If they get a lot of snow up in the northern Dakotas and up in there, we're going to get recharge. And the second thing that's very important is a playa lake system, which is kind of little mud holes that some farmers call. They farmer through them on a dry year, but they're very critical for recharging that aquifer. And there's a lot of programs out there to put conservation plantings around them to make a payment to the farmers to enhance that, put vegetation, conservation tillage, keeping that ground covered with some vegetation on it is huge on percolation of water in compared to a conventional till that's flat. I've been a no-till for about 25 years, and it's just huge. In southeast Kansas, normally 42 inches of rain. We normally don't have a problem, but back when I was doing conventional tillage, that ground was hard. We'd get a hard packing rain. It would pack, it would run off, take sediment with it, take it on downstream, and which was bad for everything. So tillage practices make a big difference, certainly as well as cropping patterns. Biologically, putting a wide-bladed corn plant out in western Kansas with a 15-mile-an-hour wind with evaporation is not really smart. However, most eastern Kansas counties don't want the feedlot stink that would be from out there. So it's kind of a trade-off, but certainly, water conserving plants like grain sorghum compared to corn is certainly a plus. Thank you for that, Mr. Chair.
Very good. All right, let's go Representative Mosley.
All right, this is my final question, Mr. Chairman, I promise. I don't really know much about water, just a big fan of drinking water. My question is, as the populations start to migrate more towards the northeast corner of our state, which I think we're at about like 70% of our population lives in this corner of the state, How, like, kind of going off of the runoff question, how is urbanization going to impact your projections for contamination and then also just water in general?
So that's a really good question. And if we had more time, I would show you this map that, and we actually showed it to the ag community. On the west side of the state, what we show is communities that are running out of water. And on the east side of the state, we show communities that sort of at a different sort of risk, 50-year supply, and thinking about how our reservoirs, can they manage that amount of water, and do you have that? The other thing you have to look at is not just population projection, important, but also thinking about the kinds of industries that you're recruiting and how water intensive those businesses are. So that, along with contamination, occurs across our state, but thinking about how we clean that up and how we, in a very prevention sort of way, think about not exacerbating the problem.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am done.
That's good.
Good question.
All right, Representative Mosier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your presentations. My question is, what has been spent from the time this serious conversation started until this moment in time? The consults, the, pooling together this information and making these plans?
That is a good question, because I think there's consultant time, there's agency time. We have partnered with the Corps of Engineers for some, they've been a really good partner for helping with that. So I think I can't give you a specific, we can come back to you with that. Because anything I said right now would be very much a guess or estimate.
Thank you.
We'll get you better numbers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Minix. Imagine that.
I'm sitting here trying to stay quiet as best I can. Representative Fairchild's question about how much is spent in surrounding states. Heather did an excellent job 2 years ago in 23 of gathering that information, and I think you would find Colorado, South and North Dakota was 3 of the states that we could get good information from. It's really hard to sort out. There's a little bit in KDHE here in Kansas. It's tough to come up with our number, let alone pulling it from these other states. But I think, Heather, we were somewhere between 120 million and 160 million a year in those 3 states. And for years here in Kansas, the water plan had, by statute, roughly about 20 million, but it wasn't fully funded from the state. Our $6 million of state general fund and $2 million of EID, Economic Development Fund, until 21. That was the first time the state really fully funded that. There's about another 12 million that come in from fertilizer fees or tax, a little bit on herbicide registrations, municipal, industrial, and stock water all paid 3 cents per 1,000 gallon into the fee for the Kansas Water Office to function. In 23, the bill that we originally passed through the House asked for $60 million. By the time we finished with the Senate and Conference Committee, we added another $35 million to it, so we were about 55. Last year, I believe this governor put another $10 million in for a few projects, so we were in the 65 to 70 million number at that time that Kansas has actually done. So if you just look at this decade, we've already ramped up quite a bit, but there's a lot more to do. For you new freshmen on the committee and for everybody, honestly, our task as we come down here to represent the people of Kansas is good governance. Good governance is looking out long distance and trying to do what we need to do. It may not always be politically popular. Asking for more money, I feel like I've jumped in the deep end of the pool. This isn't an easy time to do that, but in all honesty, by conscience, we need to do these things. And I applaud the governor's done a good job of getting us rolling again. Yes, a little money's been spent. We've been working on this project for a few years, but it's been kicked down the road for 40 years, and it's time for us to be responsible, transparent, and move forward with things. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you.
Other questions? Excuse me. My question is, I mean, we know where the budget is, let's just be honest. Where are we at with federal partnerships? You know, I think we have a hate-hate relationship with the Corps of Engineers, at least what it sounds like in some instances. And I'm smiling if anybody's watching this at 2, 3 in the morning, they can't sleep. But I think some of these are so big that we have to find federal partners, whether it be at our congressional delegation, and there's one that does earmarks or whatever that is, and if those still exist, I don't know. But we're all looking for savings of some sort, but this does touch everyone, and so that's, you know, we're looking at partnerships. Have you looked at, you know, public-private? I mean, you know, we have foundations that want to work at quality of life. I mean, again, I think it's time where, like, I have a couch in my office. You know, it's about time to turn that couch over again and try to find some more money.
So we have had actually good conversations with our federal partners, with our delegation. There are some rules and regs kinds of things that if could be relaxed. You know, the Corps suggested a couple of things that we could have better partnerships, and I think we can work with our delegation to, and some of our delegation members have been real supportive of that. So there are some things to do, and we can get you some specifics on where they would like to see some language changes.
Okay.
It's a good question and a really good point. It goes both up and down, right? We got to have good local partnership, and we got to have good federal partnership.
Other questions? Any questions for Dawn for the Water Authority? Was she still here? Any other questions about water? This is Pure Life. I think it's I don't know which product it is, but this is from last year, so I didn't throw it away. And it didn't go in the aquifer. I'm drinking it. Yeah. Yes. Representative Schlingensieben.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Don, question for you. I don't know if everybody around this table has paddled down a portion of the Kansas River with you in a kayak, but I did it once. It wasn't very far because the water wasn't very deep, and we just did kind of a brief thing, but it was very, very interesting to learn about the riverbank, what's the word? Anyway, I learned a lot going down that little section of river, and if you have an opportunity to join her on one of those from Kaw River State Park or other places where you do this, I recommend you do it. It's great. Anyway, I was just wondering whether you have some more of that scheduled in the coming warmer season.
Absolutely. We'd love for your whole entire committee to come out. I'm wearing my Kansas Riverkeeper hat right this minute, not the Water Authority, but yes, lots of opportunities to come out and enjoy the Kansas River right through downtown Topeka.
It sounds to me like a field trip after April 15th, and Representative Schlingensieben, you can lead that. I will be in western Kansas. Okay, that's it. Last call for questions. Seeing none, thank you both. Thank you for the other ones that participated in this as well. I think we'll follow back, Julie, and have you back maybe for a deeper explanation on rural, urban, even a focus Northeast Kansas, you know, over those 6, 7 populated counties, big populated counties that, as we look at this and kind of just for our edification as well, so that would be good. Okay, committee, no meeting tomorrow. Our meeting on Monday, we'll have Secretary of Agriculture Mike Beam. Tuesday, our group of commodity reports for the commissions. And right now, Wednesday, Thursday, one of those we will meet for bill introductions. And if we find we've got some calls out for some more people. So just kind of pay attention. We won't meet on Friday. Friday will be the Kansas Commodity Classic in Salina, but I don't know about other committees meeting. If some of us can get out there and participate in that. Any other announcements? Representative Rozier, what kind of bread will you bring us next week? As good as it was yesterday.
You want something different? You want something in it? You want concoction? You want bagels? You want cinnamon rolls?
I want a warm. No, I don't know. You don't have to. That's fine. You passed. So it was very good.
You have to because I got to
Well, challenge accepted. You know, whatever. That was so good, you can always do that again. But next time, remind me when it's coming so we can bring butter. So, no, that was fun. It was very delicious. Okay, anything else to go to the cause? Seeing none, we are adjourned.